move out of the States, right? You're currently in Europe, correct?
Yeah, I'm in Cologne, Germany. It was 2 years ago in June.
Okay. And what was the main decision or factor for that? Like, what would made you say, I'm gonna do this and I'm not gonna look back and just send it?
My grandfather and his parents were actually from Germany, but they had to leave because of the war, because they were German Jews.
Okay.
So for me, coming back to Germany is just a really cool experience. It's like before we moved here, we had like 3 different vacations here. I did my honeymoon here. Um, we had a cousin that was living in Germany, and he was a opera singer. So we went to see him in Berlin, and then the third trip was to this city, Cologne, or auf Deutsch Köln,
Okay.
um, and it was just a really good experience. Even though we came during between Christmas and New Year's when the weather here is the most terrible. So we had like the leftover Christmas markets from a Christmas market.
Okay.
Uh, um, and just like slushy snow, sleet, but it was still pretty cool. And I'm like, we could live here. It's easy to get around. It's um, that where we live, Cologne. It's a over 1 million people, but it's like a city of villages. So your
Okay.
neighborhood is almost a village, if that makes sense.
Yeah, yeah. I always try to talk about so my tattoos I have in my arm, um, they're from a trip that I took and I stayed in Germany for a month and obviously went to other
Oh,
countries
okay.
while I was there. Yeah, and I stayed in Würzburg. So way over there and it's always for me, it's always hard to really describe the cultural difference between the US and, like, a country like Germany and, like, you can always pinpoint things, but you have to go and experience it in my
Yeah,
standpoint, you know what I mean?
definitely.
I made a friend over there, and it's, one of the craziest things against as you would know, against US thinking is they live with their family, it was him, he was in his 20s, his parents lived in that house, and then his grandparents also lived in the house, they have generational homes, and a lot of
Yeah.
people a lot of people over here, that's if you're still, 25 years old and in your parents' basement, it's like, "What are you doing?"
Well, that's the only way to really afford a house, unless you live in the apartment here. It's called a Wohnungsgemeinschaft, and it's like you and 7 other roommates, and you share the common area. You have your own bedroom. You maybe have your own bathroom, but probably not. But it's usually 7 to 12 other roommates and those type apartments.
Yeah, the sharing's a huge thing over there. There's not
Yeah.
it's rare even in hotels, it's rare to have a, like, bedroom with a bathroom to yourself and
Yeah.
shower,
Unless you're like in a US style hotel, like a Hilton. Um, or if you live in a rural area, then it's more common that you have your own home or your own apartment. We have our own apartment. Um, One of the other reasons we came here, besides my family connection, was my husband works in logistics, and we had the opportunity to come here for his work, which totally made moving here easier because we'd always talked about, like, coming back to Germany and living here. But then with his work, we had the opportunity. I'm like, oh, yeah, it's great. Why not?
Yeah, and correct me if I'm wrong, you originally went to the UK, right? If I read that
Uh,
correct?
no, I have a master's degree from the
Okay.
UK.
Okay.
I'm originally from like rural East Tennessee.
Okay.
Like Dolly Parton's cousin was my family doctor.
Okay.
So Miley Cyrus's cousin's aunt's cousin was my doctor. Like that rule.
Okay, so you
Yeah.
country music or I
Oh,
mean
I listen to like all kinds of stuff. Yeah, like Ari Gold, who just died. May his memory be a blessing, was my favorite. Daft Punk. But yeah, definitely country because you're there in East Tennessee and they play it everywhere. But here in Germany, they play country music, and I have no idea why. Like I was at the physical therapist today, and the normal radio switched from rap to country to German rap to something in English, and I'm like, what country? Like,
That's funny. Yeah, it's very I remember asking a friend a long time ago. I'm like, why is country considered like America's music, right? In the sense of like, like what I'm like, why isn't it hip hop? Why isn't it, rock and roll or something? And like my friends basically were like, well, the US is probably, people artists don't oftentimes do world tours. It's like a tour around the US because it's like,
yeah,
not a lot of other people relate um to it from other countries. And then that's funny though. I didn't know they listened to it out there. I listened to a lot of techno. I know most of the clubs I went to in Germany were mainly techno.
yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah,
so
but in Germany, they have this crazy. It's not crazy. It's this. It's called Schlager music, which is
okay.
pop music, but it's real schmaltzy,
Okay.
and it's its own. Like you don't really even have to know German to. After you hear a couple of songs, you can probably sing along.
Okay. Awesome.
Like it's almost like pop country music about you're packing your bag and leaving. You love the life. You're drinking with your friends.
So what is your go-to for or you said you did physical therapy or physical training.
I went, yeah, it's part of my post-corona recovery.
Okay. And what's your what do you listen to usually when you
Just whatever they have on the radio. I don't pick. They have a really robust public broadcasting system here. So the public radio stations will play pretty good music and
okay.
have actually good news. So it's totally different from the US where you have PBS and then that really good station out of Chicago with PBS that makes a lot of the shows. Like The Joy of Cooking with Julia Childs, I think was the out of there. Or there's a station out of Seattle that does all the Rick Steves travel. But besides those two PBS stations in the US, I don't really think of public broadcasting in the US as like really content rich.
Yeah.
Correct me if I'm wrong. And I'm not talking about public access um, show channels. I'm talking about actual public broadcasting.
Yeah, it's
Um,
not. I
yeah,
think I think that's why most people in the US now have like I can't tell you the last time I actually listened to public broadcasting, right? It's like all my phone or
well,
doing
podcast, even the
yeah.
NPR now all have podcasts of a lot of the shows, and some of the radio hosts who were on syndicated radio in the U.S., like Clark Howard. He was a finance guru, um, like Dave Ramsey, but a lot nicer of a person. He just switched from doing his show to a podcast. He says, it's easier just to do this podcast.
Yeah, definitely. It really is, and like, I mean, I flew. I'm in Michigan currently, right? I'm visiting family, and there's not. You don't need if I compared it to doing radio, right? Like, you don't need the whole setup. I was able to bring my mic and stuff with me.
Hmm.
It's all plugged into the computer, and I'm good to go. I can do this wherever I'm at. There's no ties to anything, and then you don't have to worry about there's ads, but there's not like commercial breaks and stuff like that. That's always and then FCC and like you can say whatever you want on a podcast because it's your podcast. So it is such a great way, a new form of communication.
Yeah, it's pretty interesting how much it's come along. There's some I listened to with University of Oxford that they did like 9 years ago um, on mindfulness and mental health versus the newer episodes from today. I'm like, oh, really? They've really, you know, stepped it up.
Yeah. Yeah, and so I love that you brought up mindfulness because that's one thing on your website, you talk a lot about. So, I
Yeah.
guess I'm gonna leave the floor open to you and kind of let you dive into, your perspective on mindfulness and, you do a little life coaching, how it plays into, things like anxiety and depression. I know that you specialize in as well, right?
Yeah. So I got introduced to mindfulness when I was still living in Tennessee and working as like a nurse and counselor. I set up an alcohol and drug program for the hospital I worked for. And did at the beginning of every group therapy session, like a 1 to 3 minute mindfulness meditation for like stress reduction or just to kind of calm people down. But I was introduced to mindfulness through a study I participated in undergrad, where like if we did this study for 8 weeks, for every week we did it, they gave us like a $50 Amazon gift card. So at the
Okay.
end of 8 weeks, you were like $400 of Amazon money. It's like, oh, I'm so rich of Amazon money, even though Amazon's the devil. Um, True story, they are, in my opinion. Um, so that's how I got introduced and practicing it. And then I did my master's research with University of Hertfordshire for my Master of Mental Health Recovery. I focused on using mindfulness um, to improve the mental health and performance of airline pilots. Because if you think of like what's good for your mental health, a regular work schedule, regular work conditions, and a regular sleeping schedule and a regular sleeping environment. Well, people work in aviation don't have any of that.
Right.
Usually they get stuck at the crappiest hotel, they have the crappiest schedules. Um, and then the work dynamic is always changing and challenging. There was I think it was United airline flight this past week that had an engine failure,
Correct.
and now no one has said how good of a job the pilot did and how he was professional or how the flight crew was professional. They just the media has fixated with headlines like "terror in the sky," and then they're blaming Boeing. Well, they're so Boeing doesn't make the engine of their plane. Their plane engine in this case was um, not a GE, but it was a Prit Watton. Their other one, Prit. It's that not GE. The other people that make their engine for the Boeing.
Gotcha.
I can't remember. It's like a Pratt Whitney.
Okay.
Bam. Yes.
I'm not familiar in
So it sounds
flight
like a
engines.
watchmaker, Pratt Whitney. So yeah. So but people who work in aviation have a really stressful work environment. And I wanted to do research on mindfulness for people who would find it useful and not necessarily people who are just really have a lot going on clinically. So I did that. It was very challenging last year because of Corona. I had coronavirus, which made it more challenging to do research and survey people. But mindfulness, like the best way to sum it up, is from the guy who started researching it in the 80s in the US as Dr. Kabat-Zinn. And he says it's a way of paying attention in a particular way on purpose in the present moment. So think about eating a thing of Pringles.
Okay.
That's the opposite of mindfulness because you're just like munching away on the Pringle town. And before you know it, you're like, well, how did this get empty? Like mindfulness would be you put the Pringle in your mouth, you're aware of the texture, you're aware of the taste. You maybe even smelled it. You're aware of what's going around you. So mindfulness is being present and aware in the moment. Um, and it's been researched in everything from chronic pain management, cancer, HIV, mental health conditions, anxiety, depression, and then it's also been researched more recently into high stress positions like aviation, medicine.
Okay. And do you think so when you look at things like so you're talking about the senses, right? And you're talking about,
Yeah.
being there in the moment and being like
Yes.
fully aware that you're there in the moment, right? Is
Yeah,
that
so the opposite of multitasking.
yeah.
So like multitasking is the antithesis of mindfulness.
Okay.
Because really, unless you're like on Iron Chef or The Great Bake Off, I've never really seen people successfully multitask. And even those people don't always, they end up burning their cake. It's true.
It
Like, you
is.
really, people can't multitask. You don't have an algorithm that lets you multitask three different things.
Well, a lot of people, so like they're the famous saying, right? Uh being a jack of all trades, like a lot of people don't realize that there's like a corollary to that saying. It's like a jack of all trades is like a master of none, and like a
Correct.
master of one is I forget the finishing portion of it. Is probably why I'm just like everyone else, right? You only remember the first part of it, but it's basically getting at that like when you try to be good at everything and you're trying to focus on everything. I mean, really think about it, right? You can't give your all to five different things. You have to break it
Hmm.
up. You're like, okay, I can focus on this one. 40% of my focus can go here, and 20% can go here, and 30% can go here. And so, like, you know what I mean? It makes it very hard, and I think that's what, you're getting at, especially with the pilots, right? You're creating and when you have no rhythm in your life, right? I like to
Yeah,
define that as
because
rhythm.
there's the days of them having a set schedule or a set route are gone.
Yeah,
Like, so most of the time they have to, in aviation, all the flight crew has to bid on their schedule every month. And then with COVID, you think that the flight schedule has changed every week or day, you
right.
know, where they
Exactly.
can go.
Exactly. And so, yeah, and it creates that stressful environment that you were talking about. And so do you think that you know, with modern society though, and the way we've structured, and this one of the biggest things I've been struggling with lately is I feel like we've just really, in a sense, structured society in a very wrong direction. And what I mean by that is we focus so much, on living above our means and people even living at your means and living at your wants instead of living at your needs, right? And so I think that's created a lot of this need or want for multitasking, right? Because people are trying to always get something done.
Yeah.
You want that new car, you have to multitask because you got to do more output to get it, right? And so I remember I was talking to a friend the other day and talking about lowering the amount you do, and the less you do, the less you need to, the less you need, the less you need to do for it, right? And so like people complain about working 80 hours a week. Well, why do you work the 80 hours a week, right? It's because you're choosing to do that to satisfy either, I feel like it's more rare today to satisfy a need within yourself, and a lot of
Hmm.
people are doing it for external needs and external joys, and right. And so I think it's very hard to find mindfulness today and really push all the multitasking away and calm the brain and really focus on one thing.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I mean, your brain is not built to do all that multitasking. Um, it, like it's even the professional chefs or the semi-professional chefs on the cooking shows, when they have to do all the multitasking, end up burning their cake or ruining their fondant. Something goes wrong. And then you get frustrated, and then you ruminate on that frustration. And that ruminating, people think that ruminating helps them and focusing on something negative helps them, but it doesn't. Really, studies have shown that rumination or negative thought cycles are the opposite of helpful. They actually hinder your ability to think on your feet and come up with creative solutions and ways to get out of that stressful situation.
Definitely. Do you think your husband, well, I guess when you started the study and started the aviation, do you think he had a role in that and wanting to do that, or had you
Yeah.
not met him yet?
Well, so my dad was a retired ATC, air traffic controller in the Navy.
Okay.
Um, the chapter of my fraternity that I was initiated at was mostly aviation people at MTSU, but I finished college somewhere else. It just wasn't like it didn't work out for me the first time I went
Right.
to college. like it just financially and stuff, it just didn't work out.
Right.
But I've always had a lot of aviation people in my family. Um, my husband obviously is a pilot. A lot of our friends are in aviation, and then even my father-in-law is a retired aviation engineer. He designed the plane engines, not the one that blew up recently, not them, not them. Because that was a text like, "Did you design?" He's like, "No, that was that other company." I'm like, "Okay." Yeah.
That's funny. That's nice that,
So he was definitely an influence. And aviation mental health has a lot of stigma. So that was another thing is like I've always been focused on stigma reduction with mental health and men's health, and aviation is still mostly men, despite a lot of really good diversity and inclusion efforts. So in aviation, if you take a mental health medication like Prozac, which is super, super common in the US,
yeah.
you'll lose your flight certificate for 6 months and you may not be able to get it back. And without that medical certificate, you are not eligible to fly. Okay.
Wow.
So, oh, it gets even worse. So, like, you think, okay, well, I can't take medicine, so I'm just going to go to a therapist. If you go to a mental health counselor for more than 3 sessions and get a diagnosis, you have to report that to your medical examiner, and then you'll lose your flight certificate for 6 months. And then you have to appeal to get it back after being free of symptoms for 6 months. And then every time you renew it for the rest of your career, you have to put that down that you previously lost your certificate for mental health distress, blah, blah, blah. And then you get extra scrutiny for the rest of your working career. And that's why people in aviation don't always get help for their mental health. There was one study I read on Norwegian helicopter pilots using mindfulness. Okay, well, there's not that many Norwegian military helicopter pilots, and that's who the study was about. So that they're like the purple unicorn of aviation. There's just like 12 of them.
Okay.
So it was a good study. Um, and I thought, well, I should do some other research in people in commercial aviation who fly passengers and cargo, because and then general aviation, like people who have their own planes, because those three groups are the bulk of your, not your Norwegian military pilots.
Okay.
Like some, it was one of those things. I'm like, well, this is interesting, but would this be helpful for more than just like this one little group?
Yeah. And yeah, so what I guess how much headway do you think, I guess since you've started focusing more on the industry itself, how much change do you think's actually been accomplished in the industry in more recent years? Or do you think there's still, I mean, there's always something to be done,
Well,
but do you think there's still a lot of big stepping stones that need to be taken?
I think the two biggest supporting things for mental health stigma reduction were that the FAA in the US, the regulatory agency, and the EASA in the EU have required pilot support programs, and a pilot support program like for mental health. And some of the airlines have peer programs and so for pilots. And I think peer programs really do work for people with low to mild mental health distress. Just having someone to talk to is very, very important, um, because unless you're stuck in a cycle of distress or anxiety or depression, everybody experiences anxiety, depression. That's just part of the human experience. But the problem is when you get stuck in a cycle and just ruminate on it. Um, so I think there have been some good changes in the past couple of years. the biggest push for support in mental health in aviation was the intentional crash of a German wings flight a few years ago by a pilot who was suffering from severe depression that was untreated, and he didn't know how he wouldn't get treatment because he didn't want to lose his weight to earn a living, which was to fly a plane. And because of that, he had an intentional crash and killed himself and all the passengers.
What do you think the correct way to go about that is? And not, and when I say that, I don't mean the situation where he crashed, but like I'm assuming if I was to think about the situation, right? It's like a catch 22, right? It's okay, we didn't offer him. You can look at it as we didn't offer him the help, or we didn't allow him to get the help that he needed to
Yeah.
continue to do his job. And then I'm sure there's a half that's like, okay, this proves exactly what we're pointing at is,
Yeah.
and it's
I,
like,
I
what
think
do you
the
think?
best way to do it would be have a mental health provider that you could go to that's a designated provider who knows aviation, who either works for the union, and most airlines have a union for their pilots or and flight attendants. So a designated provider that you can go to the more than the 3 sessions, you can get a diagnosis, and unless you're suicidal or homicidal, you're fine to go to work. Like I really think there should be someone who there's um, no repercussions for you to pursue mental health assistance. You can go to a coach like me, and that's fine, and that doesn't count against your medical certificate. But if you wanted to go to like a psychiatrist or get other higher levels of care, I really think that the airlines or the unions or the pilot support program should have a designee that you can get care from. Um, and then if you go to this person, it's not held against you in your medical certificate. To me, that would be the best solution. Um, and I really don't think a lot of the therapeutic interventions interfere with your ability to work because mindfulness based cognitive therapy, like what I do, it focuses on using mindfulness based interventions to help you reduce your stress, deal with your stress, identify your negative thought cycles, and take a step back when you get into a negative thought cycle and start to ruminate in that thought cycle. So it's not the same as like going to a psycho analytic counselor who has you reflect back on your life and childhood experiences, or a traditional family or cognitive therapist where you talk about a problem and areas you're thinking. This does a little of that, but it mostly focuses on mindfulness, and how you can use things like being non judging, patient with yourself, acceptance, letting things be to reduce negative thoughts and rumination. And even if you do have negative thoughts, with mindfulness, you just kind of say, well, hey, that's just a negative thought. It is what it is. Okay, whatever.
Yeah, I mean,
I mean, there's no, it's not bad, it's not good. It's just, that's how you feel. And that's
right,
okay.
exactly. And I think that's I like the way you answered that, and I think it's a good way to answer it because when you cut off people's opportunity and branches to reach out to,
Hmm.
that's when, maybe you do have more situations like the airplane pilot that, flew the
Yeah.
plane around. And, a lot of I know I talked about this on my, last podcast, and I believe a lot of those feelings, and I could see this being a huge problem as you've described the, industry to me and exactly how kinda standoffish it is against mental health. But a lot of the feelings that people get when they're in mass deep depression is that they can't, and no one that they're alone, and no one's there to, like, reach an olive branch out to pull them up out of their dark hole, right? And like that's essentially what it's doing. If for those that don't have a dark hole, it's great, but those that are in it, you're essentially just driving them deeper into it.
Mhm. Yeah, the way I learned to think about mental health, um, working in community mental health at a community mental health hospital as a nurse and then a counselor, was from it's called the chime paradigm. So it's not like a wind chime on your mama's porch. She bought at Cracker Barrel. It stands for connectedness, hope and optimism, identity, meaning, and empowerment. So, like what you said, like community being able to connect. Okay, what's the way most people connect? Work. If you take away someone's ability to go to work and connect with people and isolate them, that's going to really devastate them. People have to have hope and optimism for the future. They have to have a sense of identity, and a lot of people have a professional identity. In aviation, it's very difficult. In the US, usually you are in the military and then you become a commercial pilot. If you're lucky enough to be a pilot in the military, it makes it easier. Or you go to college, you go to flight school, you get your hours, you work somewhere as a crop duster flight instructor by day, working nights and weekends at Target. And then you get hired at a regional airline like that's held together with duct tape, which they call speed tape. That's the technical term for duct tape. So yeah, you're flying planes held together by duct tape until you get enough hours to work at one of the big airlines or big cargo airline. That I mean, that's their career, and the people in aviation spend probably as much as folks do to go to medical school to fly a plane.
It's expensive. I remember, well, Western Michigan University is like number 6 or in the top 5 schools in the United States for aviation.
Hmm.
Uh and those I know I have friends that, went to aviation school there and it cost like 60 grand a
It is.
semester. It's
And
insane.
when you take away someone's ability to work, you also, and especially a professional field like aviation, you take away their identity, so they lose that sense of self. Well, that adds to depression. And if people can't work, well, they lose their income. But then you also take away a sense of meaning that they're contributing to society, or that they're contributing to their family, or they're just productive, and then you take away their sense of empowerment. And then the chime paradigm for mental health really focuses on that connectedness, hope, identity, meaning, and empowerment. And I like it because with that you can still have symptoms and be okay, because there's people who go through bad things and still may be depressed sometimes. You may um, lose a loved one and still be cry randomly. Yours like, or something still make you sad randomly when you think of, your dad's favorite number from Taco Bell, but your dad's been dead 10 years. And it doesn't affect your ability to work, but you still may have symptoms of depression that are more severe than just a once in a blue moon thing. And I really think even if you do have symptoms, you can still be a member of society and still be productive and still find things to do and still have recovery without being symptom free. And I think the problem I have with clinical recovery in the US is it focuses on adherence to therapy, adherence to medication, and adherence to keeping appointments that really seem to be more about producing revenue than about recovery and about helping the person find, connectedness, hope, optimism, those things that, if they have, they're going to be in recovery, even if they still have like some depression or anxiety.
Oh, definitely. I think there's always for a lot of people, there's always going to be recovery in some sort of standpoint, right? There's always, I don't think, I don't think life stays calm long enough to not be in some standpoint of like working on something. And I've realized, especially myself, right? So I recently quit my job, and a lot of stress comes with that. And one thing that I realized is it was kind of like the shake that made all the leaves fall from the tree in a standpoint. And what I mean by that
Mhm.
is I'm only 23, but up until this point, I would consider myself an emotional grave digger. And what I mean by that is I basically threw all my emotions that a normal person would have or have to develop, or bad situations that I've been through and lived through, into a grave, dug a grave, threw them in there, covered it up, and forgot about it. And said, I'm not going to deal with this. And it just becomes avoidance. And then, you have a main thing like quitting your job that I just went through. And it shook the tree, and it made all the apples fall, and all my emotions came out. And I found myself being mad, angry, sad, happy, mad about things that happened 5 years ago, and like it all unfolds, right? And so I think it's very important to be in a recovery stage of some standpoint, or be working towards that, or constantly working on yourself over leaving it untouched, because it always
Yeah.
ends up worse when it's left untouched.
Yeah. And I think with mindfulness, it gives you a set of tools that can really help you with recovery and just having good mental health. Like being non judging towards yourself. Well, I mean, that's a pretty big thing. Being patient to yourself. They call it a beginner's mind. So when you do something, you do it or you address a situation like the first time you did it. So you're more open minded. So you're more aware that, say, you're not just on autopilot. Because when you're on autopilot, you're really not paying attention. You actually probably are going to make more mistakes. And that's not really good for your mental health to always be on autopilot. A good example of being on autopilot is driving to work or a work commute, or, taking the train to work or school or whatever, and you don't even pay attention, but you know when to get up. Well, that's not really that safe or good for your mental health. You should pay attention. You should be aware.
Definitely. And I don't so what, in your opinion, I want to let you know, I know you're life coach, and I know, I don't want you to give away the product in a sense, but I guess in your opinion, what are some things, maybe some key points, or maybe some things you thought about that could help put people in that mindfulness state? And maybe and I guess, like, when I ask this, a lot of people think about meditation and stuff like that, maybe outside of
Yeah.
the norms.
Well,
So
and even the meditations like aren't like crazy meditation like you would see on TV on you're not going to be able to levitate or break bricks on your abs after doing mindfulness. Like some of the everyday practices are like mindful eating, mindful listening. Um, so you could just even like when you eat your meal, try it like every day when you eat breakfast, mindfully eat your breakfast. Drink your coffee or tea, enjoy it, smell it, taste it. Really like, oh, this this tastes like instant coffee. This Okay, this is terrible. Okay, maybe they have a good markdown at Kroger. Maybe I should get that instead. Um, and the same with mindful eating. That's an easy practice you can introduce. Um, Mindful walking is one of my favorites. I've done it part of my post corona recovery because I had coronavirus last year in March and April. It's been a year. Whew. Still cough sometimes. Um, Mindful walking. So, like, you start out with walking, You focus on the sensation of your feet and you're walking, and then you bring your attention to your breath. And then the next thing you bring your attention to is the sounds. So you might hear sounds, but you don't label the sounds. You're just open and non-judgmental to the sounds. Um, you have that kind of acceptance. They could be birds, it could be a plane, it could be a car. You don't label them; they're just sounds. And like they're like the random thoughts in your head. You just kind of hear them, like okay, they're there, and just let them go. And then your next thing you do is you bring your attention to your sense of smell. Um, if you're in the park, wherever, you might smell grass, but you don't say, "Oh, that's grass." You just smell it and be like, "Okay, that's a smell." And then your sight, you look around, see things, but you don't label them. You just they're things, and you keep walking. Then you bring your attention back to your breath, focus on your breathing. And if you have random thoughts, that's okay. They're just random thoughts, but you're focusing on your breath. And then that's, kind of like an abbreviated Reader's Digest of a mindful walking practice. That's one of my favorite ones to do. Um, like when I first was recovering from Corona, I could walk like 10 or 15 minutes and that was it. And then I was dead.
Definitely. I like that a lot. I think I'm a huge fan of walking and not even it's exercise, but like not even for that purpose. I think especially when you walk and are like, I'm not gonna look at my phone and are like, I'm gonna be here, experience
Yeah.
the trees, hear the birds. Yeah, I think that's great. I think my other thing that I try to do is mindful reading and
Mhm.
really try to focus on because there's a lot of times I read like, I'm not reading. What I mean is this, I'm reading the words, but my mind is definitely somewhere else, and it's thinking about something. It happens all the time, and to me, it's really hard for me to, like, stay focused on my book throughout a whole
Mhm.
reading session. There's always times when my mind leaves and goes somewhere else.
Yeah. And not just for mental health, but I think mindfulness also helps for performance in like work and sport, um, and helping people focus on the moment they're in. Because there's this saying, and I forget who says it, but I should Google it to confirm who is the original author. But when you're focused on the past all the time and ruminating, you're going to have depression. When you're focused on the future all the time and ruminating on it, anxiety. But when you're focused on the moment and the present and just being, you're being mindful and you're going to be happy and probably healthy and more productive. And I don't mean productive as, you're going to be the next Elon Musk with doggy coin, but you're productive, and what you are doing, you really accomplish what you're doing. You're focusing on what you're reading, you retain what you read. Or if
I
you're in a sport, you perform better.
I wanna reiterate what you just said there because I think it's really a great thing, and I think you put it in a great way, right? If you're always thinking about the past, it leads to depression, right? And it can lead to depression. I'll say that because some people's pasts are wonderful. Um, and if you're always thinking about the future, it leads to anxiety, and
Yeah.
that's why it's
Uh,
important to be present.
I mean, like there's things in my past I could be sad over and ruminate. Um, but what good would that do me? Like, I mean,
Right.
I can learn from those things and those experiences. I could be anxious about the future. Will the borders open again? Will I be able to travel again? But I don't know. No one knows.
Right. Right.
It's just kind of like, why ruminate? And there's an investment guru I really, really like, Susie Orman, and she talks about investing in the known versus the unknown. And that's the same with like your mental health, your financial health, your physical health. You need to focus and invest in the known, not the unknown.
Yeah. That's
It,
it makes sense. Yeah. That's great. I'm not familiar with her, but I like that saying a lot. I think that's a great. I think it's more applicable than just investment, right? I think it's,
Yeah, it is because you could focus on like your career, like, well, I have this degree, but they may change the law that you need a different degree to do this job, or they may not, you know. Like, I started out in nursing as an LPN, and they were talking about getting rid of LPNs, but apparently they've been talking about doing that for like 50 years, and it doesn't happen. So why would I stress out about that?
Right.
Like,
Right. So, one positive thing about your past is Mr. Bear, Germany,
Yes,
2020.
yeah. So actually, I'm 2020 and 2021.
Okay.
So I won Mr. Bear Germany, November of 2019, thanks to the sport support of the rugby club here, the RSV Cologne, and then the inclusive rugby team, the Cologne Crushers. Thanks to their support, I won that. Um, it's an election that they do for all of Germany for the Bears, for the hairy bearded man. Um, and there was online voting, and then an in person with judges, and then an audience vote.
Okay.
And I ended up winning that November of 2019. I was able to represent Germany in a couple of events in Budapest. I'm trying to think. Um, Up in Hamburg at a German event, and then at the Palm Springs Winter Warm Up for the Gay Pilot Association. Um, and that was it. And then there was the pandemic. But then, fortunately, last September, I was able to go to Salzburg, Austria, and we were all masked and socially distant for their uh, CSD Pride and represent Germany. Um, and then I was able to be in the Cologne CSD Pride Parade. But we did it with masks and on bicycles to keep our distance. Um,
And
yeah,
so
and
how many people vote on that?
I'm not really sure how many people vote, but it's a really big party when they have the actual party um, and election, and there's people from around the world that come to it. And because of the pandemic, they were kind enough to give me an extra year to be Mr. Bear. But I really don't think that until more people are vaccinated that there'll be events again. So I don't think that I'll have any Mr. Bear events until this fall or winter,
Okay.
maybe. Hope
What is
hopefully.
what's the criteria, or is it just strictly voting? I mean, what do you think, like,
You,
having
you-
the
you're you're supposed to live in Germany,
Okay.
which I meet. Um, you are supposed to represent like the ideals of it. In the bear community, everybody has body positivity as their platform or talks about body positivity off to which corporate positivity. Um, but my platform was stigma reduction for mental health and HIV because those were two areas I worked in a long time. I like worked in and researched in, but then also like diversity and inclusion in sport. I play with an inclusive rugby team, or I did until the corona. Um, so yeah, so that was my platform. It's a lot of fun. I mean, it's like um, you get to um, support a lot of different events and fundraisers for people in the community, like I've done, thanks to support one of the charities here called AIDS Helpful Home. It's our NGO that provides HIV prevention and testing services to the Cologne community. So that's one of the things I've been proud to support as Mr. Bear Germany. and then the SOFRA, which is our LGBTQ plus refugee support group. I've also been proud to support that because those folks have an additional layer of stigma. The refugees plus their LGBTQ plus folks in a different country. So they have a
Yeah,
lot going on, you know?
definitely, definitely. I could see how that's difficult. What do you think? So there's recent reports, I guess, kind of recent, right? I've read that like they're starting to not cure, but kind of cure people of HIV.
Well,
Um,
there's been like three people. There was
yeah,
one guy, they called him the Berlin patient because he was treated in Berlin, and he actually passed away recently from, I think, lymphoma. Um, but they've really been able to do a lot of things with biomedical interventions in HIV for treatment. So now, like someone who's HIV positive, who's in treatment and is undetectable, meaning they have a virus load that doesn't show up on an HIV test, they cannot transmit HIV. So you'll see things in public health U equals U, and that means undetectable equals untransmittable. And that gives people the option, to have children, to have like almost a normal life. They still need to take their medication. And then there's other interventions like PrEP. The brand name in the US is Truvada. It's a once daily pill which prevents the transmission of HIV. And it's pretty effective. Like they don't tell you in like the studies, but that you can miss a few doses. They're like take it every day, but like taking every day, it's been proven to prevent the transmission of HIV,
yeah,
which is like amazing because the average cost of HIV medicine in the US is like over $30,000 a year.
yeah, that's crazy. That's
It is crazy. It's like the only country with the crazy drug prices.
yeah, the U.S. medical system's definitely interesting in that standpoint, and just the outrageous cost for people that need it.
Oh yeah, and then the way I call it voodoo bookkeeping, the way they do billing and charge people um, so much more for something because they know the insurance will only pay this much, but then the people who don't have good insurance or don't have any insurance still get charged the really high amounts
Gotcha.
on of medications for prevention and treatment that last 3 to 6 months that are like just a shot you go get at the doctor.
Okay, and so I didn't know they offered the shot for it. That's kind of crazy.
Well,
I know.
not yet. It's
Okay,
in the research, so it's like something it's out there that there's probably like 100 people getting, but it's not like something that someone could go to their doctor and be like, "Hey, I would like to switch from a once daily pill to coming in every 3 to 6 months." It's not there yet.
I'm sorry. You sounded like one of those commercials. Hey, I want to switch from this to this.
Have you talked to your doctor about blah blah blah? Yeah, we don't have those commercials in Germany. We'll have a commercial for like aspirin, and then it says, you need to talk to your pharmacist or doctor about this for aspirin.
That's it. It's not trying to
Yeah,
convince you that life will be greater because you took that medication.
correct. We don't get those commercials in Europe, or at least Germany.
Gotcha. So you talk a lot about the LGBTQ community, and you're very involved in it. And you've been, and you yourself are a part of the community, correct? And so I guess, I was wondering if you would be willing to share a little bit about that journey and kind of, maybe some of the difficulties you've experienced with it. And I think it's important to talk about, stuff like that and help people
Yeah,
better understand if you're comfortable with doing that.
yeah, that's fine. For me, it's like kind of been like a back and forth. So I came out to my mom and family, and they were okay. And then they put me in. It's called conversion therapy.
Yep.
It's like to pray out the gay or whatever.
Correct.
And then I was just so miserable and so depressed from that. Um, and then because I quit speaking to my mom, I didn't have to go anymore. That was basically why I didn't have to go, because I just quit, shut down. And really, like when I went to college and joining a fraternity made me feel like kind of like normal and connected again. I mean, I had that like after doing the conversion therapy, but it was just really hard for me to talk to people, um, and connect with people after that experience until I went to the college the first time. Um, so, I mean, but, and then, and then, later was in the workforce. And then I worked for a company that in some states had workplace protections, but then other states didn't. The state I worked in did not have any workplace protections. Um, and then even with marriage equality, um, you could still get fired the next day or lose your housing if you had government housing or had a private apartment. It was still legal to like, say, no, I don't want you living here, or
Well,
no, I don't want you working here. So just even the being on the same footing in the workplace has changed, like in the past year. Those are some experiences I had, and I remember when I worked for one company, one of the managers told me to be like, literally said to be less gay. Like he was like, "You'll be successful if you're less gay."
that's just insanity. It's
It,
so
it is, it is insane. Like it is, it. Yeah, it was just, yeah,
well, what surprises me today is, you know, how I guess it just amazes me how uncomfortable people are still, even some people today. And it's I remember I worked at a department store for a little while, and I am a straight male, but I worked at this department store, and I know a lot about fashion. It's what I studied in college. And I'm putting together these outfits for this lady and trying to get together. And she must have asked me 10 times if I was gay. And eventually I was first like, I was like, yeah, what, no, like I get it, like I can throw an outfit together. And I was just like, and then I was just kind of like, are you like worried about that? Like, is this like a, you're not going to buy from me type of situation? Like in that moment, I just couldn't like, I just, you know, I guess like I kind of had a reflection of like, I couldn't imagine if say actually was and had to
yeah,
consistently experience that. And I think it's just, I guess I just like talk about the journey because even, I think conversion therapy places are I would I don't know, I guess an assumption are less common today, but I think it's amazing that like people just thought, yeah, pray the gay away. I think that's like an
yeah, and like
insane thought.
the guy I went to had no mental health clinical training. He had a degree in sport broadcasting and communications, and that didn't work out. So he became a pastor and then a pastoral counselor. That was it. Um, yeah, so they just make me feel terrible about for no reason.
Right.
Um, so I mean that was hard, and then I had other things that actually I went to a workshop today on virtual reality to help therapy. It's called Life Path VR, and you'll do virtual reality, a picture of your life journey. And I
Okay.
like did like a little sketch one today. Like that was one of the exercises.
Okay.
And they give you a virtual reality headset to do your stuff, and it's pretty neat. So I did like growing up, what your first memory was. I was in a bad car crash when I was 10, so I have that. And then getting sent to that therapy. It's not real therapy, so that's in
Right.
air quotes. Being in 4-H, and the 4-H people were pretty cool and accepting. Um, Better than like the in the 4-H, you think, well, that's like for people with cows. well, I didn't have cows. I did the fashion and the cooking projects and community service with 4-H, and I really enjoyed it, better than a lot of the stuff with my high school. Like, I remember one teacher, she told my mom and the parent volunteers that I was too nice to be gay, like too nice of a person, like to be queer. So that was just, yeah.
It's
So
just so absurd that like I just feel like it's, you don't put any, I guess, judgment on people based on heterosexuality, right? Like no one looks at someone's like, you're a heterosexual. Oh, you like your coffee with no creamer, and like, you know what I mean? Like, just like, and I think
well,
it's
yeah,
just,
they don't think, oh, straight people, you must
yeah,
like brunch. They'll
yeah,
think gay people, you like brunch.
right. And I
You
just
know
think
fashion.
I just think it's so amazing, and like that's the mindset. And I think it's also insane that in the US that it's not legal everywhere for gay people to be married. And I think
Well, it
that's
is
another,
now,
it
like
is
finally. Yeah, there was a Supreme Court decision 6 years ago,
okay.
just 6 years ago, for marriage, but they're still like kind of piecemeal addressing things like Social Security, survivor benefits. Um, there was a Justice Department ruling about workplace protections,
Okay. Uh,
just this, just like in 2020. And I'm like, oh my goodness, this is like such a but I mean, it is a crazy world. Like, I
yeah.
mean, it's just so, the, yeah, it is just crazy.
Yeah, okay. Thanks for enlightening me. I didn't know that that happened in the hearing. And I guess one other question that I wanted to ask you is, how different do you think, whether the way you're treated or the acceptance of, others, not that it matters, how different is it from the United States to being in Germany or Europe?
I think it's, at least in like Western Europe, like the EU countries, like no one really cares. And I know people, the stereotype is that more rural areas that people are like more closed minded, but I've never experienced that in Germany or Austria. And I've been to quite a few rural areas with my husband on trips. We did our honeymoon here, and we told them it was our honeymoon in rural, very rural areas. Um, yeah, no one cares. Like, really, they didn't care.
Well,
They was
like
just
that.
like, yeah, they're like, oh yeah, whatever. Just make sure you put your trash in that can, your recycling in that can, and then your bottles you return for a refund.
Yeah, well, that, I mean, that's how it should be though. Like, I just don't like, why do people feel the need to involve themselves with someone else's life? And one of my favorite sayings about things is like, love who you want to love. The world's a shitty place no matter who you love. So like, if you want to love another guy, if you want to love another girl, if you want, to love the picture frame that hangs in your wall, love what or whoever you want to love. Like, it doesn't affect, I just don't understand, like, it doesn't affect your personal life. So why I just never understood why
Yeah.
people are so concerned about it.
Well, and like my marriage really doesn't affect anyone. Like, so I don't see why it's a big deal. And like to me, like if you're ruminating and like in a negative thought cycle about two dudes getting married all the time, you're like, oh, the gays or the lesbians, or oh, there's something wrong with you. Like that you're just focusing on that, ruminating on that, brooding of like what's going on in your life, that's really what you need to focus on. Like for real. Don't y'all have something else to deal with?
They're not
Maybe you
being
should
mindful.
defrost your freezer. I don't know. Clean out your closet. Uh,
I can tell you they're not being mindful.
no, they're
Yeah.
not being mindful. You know, being mindful is like being present, being in the moment, being non judgmental, being open, letting things be. Um, yeah, that's mindfulness, not, oh, the gays are getting married. And here I am on my fifth marriage. Like, some of the people who go on about it are the funniest. because they've been there was a radio personality who died recently who'd been married like 4 or 5 times, who made a big deal about Pete Buttigieg. Buttigieg.
Yeah.
I'm from East Tennessee and live in Germany. I can't speak English or German. It's tough. Mayor Pete, who's now Secretary of Transportation Pete, like hugging his husband and having him at his swearing in ceremony. And the radio personality's like, how are people going to explain this to the children? I'm like, the same way you explain that you've been married 4 times. You just love them. You
Like,
loved all 4, 5. I don't know how many times you're
that's such
married,
like
but
a yeah, like I just
who
don't understand.
cares?
What do you mean? How are you gonna explain to him? How do you explain, being straight? Like it's the same.
Yeah,
They
you just
love
be
who
like,
they
well,
love.
they're married, and and what is marriage? It's when two people love each other, and that they want to express that, and have those property and financial protections, because that's another thing. Until there was marriage equality, like same-sex couples did not have the same property rights, tax benefits, or inheritance rights.
Wow. That's crazy.
I know. And here we are, like in the 2000s, and it's just like just now. Yeah.
It's so yeah. It's so crazy and so I one of the things I love about living where I live in Oakland and San Francisco, the Bay Area. Um, I just feel like in that aspect, in the aspect of just accepting people for like whatever they want to do or who they are, is just so beyond years than many other places. It's just so like everyone, I will say everyone just loves letting other people do what they love. Like it's just like do whatever you want to do, whatever makes you
Yeah.
happy. You want to smoke weed, you want to be gay, you want to, you know, who knows? Who cares? You want to ride scooters, you want to do wheelies on motorcycles, you can do whatever you want, whatever's making you happy. It's not affecting my own life. And I think it's just great. I think more places should be like that. Um, so outside of being a mindful person and life coaching and really coaching people through that, and what do you do? What do you like to do for what keeps your sanity? And what I mean by that is not everyone can be on and focus 100% of the time. What's your go-to thing in your free time to just let it
Well,
all out?
I like to read, and I love to travel, and I like the outdoors. And my health permitting, I liked rugby. Um, it's a really fun sport. I'm real lucky in Cologne that we have such a really good rugby team for beginners, and that's very inclusive. The Cologne Crushers, and our whole rugby club is just really good. Um, so that was a lot of fun before Corona, before like my health problems with Corona. It was a really uh, exercise outdoors, connect with people, social events. People are social creatures, so you really do need friends. Like you really do need to connect with people, and not just your friends from Ingress and Pokemon, um, or Neopets online. Like real people. Sometimes you need to like see people, um, and travel. I mean, the great thing about Germany and Europe is travel is so easy with the train system. And even like going to different regions of Germany by train to go hike or something is very, very feasible and easy to do.
All right, and with your free time being said, and what you do in your free time, it is time for the Man Meets Modern Crazy Stories. It is your turn to talk about one of the craziest things that you've ever done in your life.
Oh, wow. I should have thought this out. My crazy story. Probably the craziest story I have is the time I stole the church sign from the church that had the ex gay therapy counseling program. Yeah, I stole their church sign and put it in someone's yard.
Okay, okay. What why was your, you just wanted to be funny? What was the reasoning for, stealing the church
Well,
sign?
well, it was the church that I had to do my ex gay therapy at.
Okay. Gotcha, lots of
And
reasons
then, yeah, so I was just kind of like, well, I'm going to take your side,
then.
put it in the
Aw
back of my truck and put it somewhere.
that's
So,
that's
yeah.
so wholesome. I've had people on here, and they talk about doing acid in different countries, and I just love that yours is stealing a church sign.
I mean, that could be pretty bad in some circles.
Oh, yeah. No, no, I'm not. I mean, teach their own, that's awesome. So, Bryson, where can people find you? You know, where I know you got
Um,
the website, I'm gonna add it into the
yeah,
description, but yeah, go ahead and let people know where to find you and,
yeah, you can find me at www.b, the letter B, mindful.de, and on Instagram at bemindful.de, which I'm really surprised Instagram let me have that name with like a dot something on it, but they did. Um, yeah, you can find me on my website or on Instagram. My name on both is bemindful.de.
awesome, great. And then, if there's one thing, we've talked about a lot, mindfulness and everything, there's one thing you would really like people to take away from this, what would it be?
I mean, life is like totally chaotic. Um, like no matter how you look at it, there's always going to be chaos. If you look at history, there's always kinds of crazy things going on. And really, if you want to find your peace, you need to start with yourself, like being at peace with yourself. And you can start with that just like a few minutes every day of just like using a mindfulness meditation, breathing, having your me time. But if if it's something like reading that helps you calm down or music, do it mindfully, be present, and be in the moment. And really, that's all you have is the moment that you're living in. That's all any of us have is this moment, you know?
Never guaranteed the next moment.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, I appreciate you coming on the cast and talking to the Band Meets Modern crew and I haven't gave people a name. I think I'm gonna emblems of Sasquatch, maybe the little squatchers. I might call everyone the little
Maybe.
squatchers.
Like I do have the beard.
Yeah. Awesome. So yeah, again, I appreciate you coming on and talking about your journey and talking about what you do.
Yeah. Thank y'all for having me.
Definitely.